This is the Glenn Beck Program.
Well, hello, America, and welcome to the Glenn Beck Program and The Blaze. This is the network that you are building. The scariest word in Washington today seems to be sequester. This is what they're calling the automatic, across-the-board, $85 billion in spending cuts set to begin March 1st. Eventually will total about $1.2 trillion in cuts over the next, count them, 10 years. Oh, we're never going to be able to survive the sequester. Progressives are in complete panic mode, and they're trying to get you to panic as well. That's why they're proposing we tax the rich. I mean, they're not even going to feel it. Wait a minute, did we just tax the rich? They're not going to feel it. Sure, it's another $55 billion in a tax hike, but it's going to stave off all those cuts, and they're so deep, you won't be able to take it. Well, that tax cut thing's expected to fail, but I don't think so, because in the end, the Republicans are nothing but wieners. And all indications are the sequester will kick in. Right. But even with the sequester, we are in so much trouble. No, with the sequester, we won't be in trouble. Without the sequester, we will be. Because we're spending so much money. Let's just do it this way. Let's take how much money are we spending minus the money we take off the table. Spending is now increasing with the sequester. $9 trillion over the next 10 years. Wait a minute, I thought it was going to be I thought it was like cutting to the bone. No. There's still a $9 trillion increase. So even with the sequester, we're looking at an additional $7 to $8 trillion, $9 trillion in additional spending. Okay. Well, the good news is we have people in Washington who are figuring all of this out. I mean, we're all paid into health care now, right? Do we want to get 2 years ahead? You're paying for universal health care, but you haven't gotten any of the benefits yet, have you? No, because we wanted to get ahead. All right, we wanted to get way out ahead of this thing because, you know, we have the high risk pool thing, you know, we wanted to put it all in there. And that's, you know, if anybody has like existing conditions or anything, yeah. Those high risk pools, completely dry now. Nothing in there. We haven't even started and it's already out of money. Only in Washington, D.C. would a fix to health care dry up before it even started. Or a multi-trillion-dollar spending increase would be viewed as a very scary spending cut. What should be scaring Washington is just about everything else. High unemployment, it's stagnating around 8%, or almost double what most would consider acceptable. Global currency wars, yeah, that's great. The dollar continues to suffer, and countries like China are engaging in currency manipulation, which is buying the U.S. debt. In other words, the rest of the world is trying to deliver a knockout blow to the dollar's dominance. The war debt. The United States will have spent $3.7 trillion on the Iraq and Afghani wars by the time they are both over. That's if you think that they will ever end. Unemployed veterans. 252,000 of our military veterans are currently unemployed. 250,000? That, by the way, is 74,000 more American veterans and their families that are unemployed than were unemployed last year. The recession. The administration tries to pretend that we're not in a recession, but all indications are exactly the opposite. Household income has declined by over $4,000 a year since this president took office. The economy shrank for the first time since 2009. 5.4 million people have left the labor force. Typical recessions last about 10 months. It's now 62 months since we entered the Great Recession, no recovery. Then there's class warfare. Wealthy individuals, guys that talk like this and now the third. The large businesses, they stink. All the banks, they're all blamed for all of the problems. And so many people are convinced that we now have people attempting to blow banks up to start a class war. And then you have racial tensions. Anyone disagreeing with this president is immediately called a racist, and race incidents keep coming up. Later on in the program, we're going to tell you how our government, the USDA, is actually training people to be racist. I'll show you this film that is shocking on what our government is doing. Alec Baldwin also this weekend allegedly called a photographer a coon and a drug dealer, while another man slapped a screaming child on an airplane, bad enough, and then told the mother to shut that N baby up. Boy, we're a mess, aren't we? And what makes our fragile state even more fragile is this. 46 million Americans are currently living in poverty. We're draining all of the lifeblood and color out of our country, just like it has been sucked out of your screen over the last few minutes. Something's not wrong with your screen or your computer. We took it out because I wanted to take you back to a time where we had the same problems that we have today. That time was around 1920. In the 1920s, they had awful problems, and they needed a solution. Well, they found one. What is the solution to poverty? Prosperity. Calvin Coolidge understood. You can't spend your way to prosperity any more than an alcoholic can drink their way to sobriety. Instead, you cut spending, you cut taxes. The elites will tell you that we can't pay for the tax cuts, but they completely ignore the fact that tax cuts pay for themselves. Now, how is that possible? Because if you get out of people's way, if you free companies up, they hire more people. And those people create more and new and different things. And by doing that, that creates more jobs, which means those people who are now working that weren't pay taxes. That's how we got to the Roaring 20s. America was in a depression following the end of World War I. Unemployment doubled in 1 year to 11.7%. The gross national product declined 6.9%. That's staggering. The Dow fell 47%. The Fed raised the interest rates to a record 7%. It was ugly. And then Woodrow Wilson left office, and Harding and Coolidge came in. And what they did is never talked about in history books, because history books are written by progressives, and progressives don't like the answers that actual history provides. What they did was reduce the size and spending of government. They drastically reduced taxes. They repealed crazy ideas on taxes like the wartime excess profits tax. That means any profit that a company had, they had to spend it because those were excess profits. You didn't need all that profit. The top marginal tax rate on individuals fell from 73% during Woodrow Wilson to 25% by 1925. Gee, what caused the Roaring 20s? Now, it was a Republican that came in, but he was a progressive Republican, and they hate it every time I say this, the Hoover family, but he was. He raised that income tax back up to 63%. Gee, why do you think we had such a hard time? We had progressives in both parties. Unemployment under Coolidge averaged 3.3%. It was, under Wilson, 20%. Federal debt lowered from $22.3 billion in 1923 to $16.9 in 1929. Federal spending was slashed nearly in half in just 2 years, from $6.4 billion to $3.3 billion. Wait a minute. How could the debt and the deficit be slashed when they also slashed taxes. So what happened? Well, the Roaring '20s happened. Massive expansion and innovation. This is a Chevrolet. Nobody had cars. Nobody had cars back then. In the early 1920s, only the wealthy could afford a car, the fat cats. But by the end of the 1920s, 1 in 5 Americans owned a car. And a lot of things changed. I don't know about you, I'm watching Downton Abbey. My wife and I are positively addicted to it. The beginning of the 1920s, only the wealthy had top hats. But by the end, ladies had flapper outfits and men had top hats. Prosperity came to everybody. Well, that's until the elites started to make evil people out of those evil people that have money. The economic classes, however, were for the first time dressing alike. They became accessible. And, well, everything wasn't accessible. They did have prohibition. The progressives didn't like anybody drinking in these days. But a lot of things changed. Nobody in 1920 had a refrigerator. Who would have a refrigerator? Who would have a phone? Well, nobody did. In 1926, only 5,800 people had ever flown in an airplane. But 4 years later, it was 70 times that amount. And if you wanted to hear somebody breaking a record, well, you could just listen to the radio, because by the end of the 20s, almost everybody had a radio. But not only was there more stuff, there was also something else that was kind of unique: less crime. In fact, it wasn't just less crime. Woodrow Wilson is using exactly the same technique that President Barack Obama is using. President Barack Obama is using race to pit us against each other. Well, Woodrow Wilson did the same thing, except it was reverse. It was white racism. He was stirring up the Ku Klux Klan and trying to make everybody afraid of each other. But by the time he got out of office and the end of Coolidge, racial tensions eased. Why? The boom. KKK membership soared in 1920, right in the middle of an economic depression. But as the economy strengthened, KKK membership fell drastically. It was at a peak in 1925 of 5 million people. 2 years later, 350,000. Now, what law did they pass to make people get out of the Klan? None, except for the law of prosperity. People are likely to do stupid things when they're hungry, and they're less likely to do stupid, insane stuff when they're fed, when they're fat and sassy. Coolidge was an amazing guy. He was Ronald Reagan's favorite president. And boy, nobody pays attention to him. These are original letters from Calvin Coolidge. This is a letter from Calvin Coolidge right after the stock market collapsed. He's a pretty amazing guy. In an amazing time. This is Babe Ruth's. Where is it? Where does it say Babe Ruth? Here it is. There's Babe Ruth's luggage right here in the 1920s. A lot of things happened in the 1920s. Nobody ever seems to ask what caused the Roaring '20s. Will anyone bother to look at the cause? We will tonight when we come back.
When the government effects a new economy, it grants everybody a life pension with which to raise the standard of existence. It increases the value of everybody's property and raises the scale of everybody's wages. One of the greatest favors that can be bestowed upon the American people is economy in government.
That's Calvin Coolidge preaching what he practiced. Over the years, his legacy has been tarnished. He's a man really forgotten by most, and he should be the one that we are studying right now. Amity Schley, she is the author of The Forgotten Man. She has written a book called Coolidge. Hi, Amity, how are you?
Hi, Glenn.
This is what a great follow-up to The Forgotten Man, because it's really kind of, and I know it's taking it out of order, but The Forgotten Man shows us the problem, which is progressivism and giant government, and here's the solution.
Oh, well, that's right. This is the prequel.
Yeah.
As in Star Wars, this is the prequel. So The Forgotten Man is how they broke it, and this is how they fixed it in the 1920s, courtesy of the forgotten president, Calvin Coolidge.
So help me out, because I look at Wilson and Barack Obama, and I think they're the same guys. I mean, in many ways, they're exactly the same guys. They're doing the same thing. They're using the same tactics, same scapegoats, and we're getting the same kind of results. So how does somebody like Coolidge come in? Can somebody like Coolidge, where the American people have forgotten their own history and their own work ethic, how do you repair it?
I think they remember it. I mean, one thing is it'll get a little worse in our economy, and we'll realize that we need a stronger president, won't we? I mean, that just happens from time to time. Supposing our credit rating, for example, goes down, which might well happen, we'll start looking for a president like Coolidge.
Well, we didn't in the 1940s with FDR. With FDR, it just kept spiraling downhill, and it get worse and worse and worse, and people would still look at that guy and say, you know, he's the answer. Coolidge actually went around and he tried to tell the lion cub story, because he tried to actually teach people the principles again in unique ways.
Oh, well, thank you for asking. Coolidge loved tax cuts, and he was a sterling tax cutter, a gold standard tax cutter. His top rate was 25%, which is lower than Reagan's, for example. But he always did his tax cuts with budget cuts, and he had these lion cubs he got as a present from South Africa, and he named them Budget, Bureau, and Tax Reduction as twins in order to remind people that the two go together inexorably. You can't have tax reduction without budgeting.
Okay.
I like that very much.
And that's really what the problem is now. We're saying, they keep saying, well, we will have all, if we raise taxes, we'll have, the spending will go out of control. Well, of course it will, if you only do one of them.
Well, that's right. And Coolidge was different from Reagan in that he really wanted to see them twin, like those cubs. The cuts and the cuts, right? And we can learn from that. But he also had great faith in growth, in economic growth. I mean, I think we're in a vicious cycle right now, Glenn, where nobody expects much from people. So they don't expect much from themselves. But as you know yourself, journalists aren't gods or priests. They're just people, and they're sheep themselves, and we shouldn't follow them. We should heed our own common sense.
Okay.
That's my view.
All right. So he also vetoed an awful lot. I mean, he used the veto like this president is using the executive order, to where he came in and vetoed almost everything that was coming through.
Right. He vetoed substantively new entitlements. And we don't want to pretend they didn't have challenges and demands for entitlements. They had the veterans who wanted a pension, basically Social Security, and had a pretty compelling case for it. The veterans had worked hard in World War I. 1/3 were disabled in one way or another, a period with no antibiotics and no angiograms. They needed something, but Coolidge and Harding before him indeed said, no, we can't really afford to create a permanent entitlement. They didn't use the word entitlement, but that's what they meant. And likewise, farms. Coolidge himself, a farmer. I was just at Plymouth Notch, a very simple farming place with numerous challenges. And he just said when the farming subsidy people came to him, well, farmers never have made much money, have they? And I don't see we can do much about it. And therefore, he was able to keep the government small. And we tend to see that as inhumane, except the result was so very humane because the employment was below 5% much of the time. I mean, the unemployment, the budget was in surplus. People got real wage increases without a minimum wage. The 20s were a great decade without government intervention, and because of the absence of government intervention, in fact.
Okay, now he was really popular at the time?
And this ascetic austerity man, now we say austerity so bad, right? You can't win with austerity. Won just so many elections. The outstanding one we want to mention on television is that in 1924, when he ran for president, the progressives were doing pretty well. So they got 17% of the vote. These are the people who want to nationalize power, for example. Yet Coolidge beat the progressives and the Democrats combined to win an absolute majority. So austerity could win. And in 28, when he chose not to run again, famous moment, Republican Party just about had a nervous breakdown because they couldn't imagine anyone but him.
And unfortunately, they went with a. Would you agree that Hoover was a progressive?
I would, and in Forgotten Man, and you and I have talked about that. Hoover was the forgotten progressive. He was truly progressive, and in many ways closer to Roosevelt, who followed him.
Right.
So the thesis of Forgotten Man is that the sort of intervention habit that was destructive, that made the Depression great, started with Hoover.
I was struck by the story. Where was it? In Mississippi, where the flood happens, and I was struck by the parallel, really, of Coolidge and what they said about him and what they really said about Bush with Katrina. Even though Bush did stuff, Coolidge didn't. But they said Bush hates black people, and they said Coolidge, because he didn't send any aid, said he hates Southerners, right?
Oh, that's right. Yes, it's hard for a president not to go to a disaster, but sometimes there are reasons presidents don't jump to go to disasters, not even the way they'd go in a foreign capital during a war. It's because of their respect for federalism. And in the case of Coolidge, he really didn't want a giant new entitlement for infrastructure spending in emergency. Sounds very familiar, like today. And he knew if he went down as president, it would invite a stronger application for serious subsidy and sort of infrastructure entitlement. So he didn't go, and he was much criticized. The lawmaker Thaddeus Caraway said, well, if it were your region, I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially if it were his region, he'd have a special session of Congress and perhaps go. And then there was a kind of retribution, because indeed, after the Mississippi flood, to which Coolidge did not go down, there was a terrible flood in his birth state, Vermont, and he could not go to be consistent. And he did not go, and not all the Vermonters understood. He sent Hoover each time, but he was able to block the worst of infrastructure subsidies. So he was able to do what he said. He was a man of principle, even when it caused him great pain. And that's why this story is so compelling in the book, what I discovered.
How did he remain, I guess it's just prosperity, I guess, but how did he remain popular? Because he never spoke. I mean, he didn't say anything.
Well, people can appreciate someone who gets out of the way. They didn't have modern economic theory. So his theory was, if I get out of the way, you heard it in your wonderful clip you just showed. If I get out of the way, you'll have more freedom. And people saw that they did. And
okay, so how do we get there from here? I mean, here you've done so much. You know, this is not a light book, and you're not exactly you're not exactly a light scholar. So as you look through this, you had to have seen the parallels. And is there a way out for us? What should we be doing?
Oh, I do think there's a way out for us. And it starts with, I mean, I've written about you before. It starts with having alternate voices. This is very important. It also starts, this sounds so tame, Glenn, but I believe in it, with education in high school and college. I know what happens when you get the employees you get, or when we meet the young people we met. Often they're not so well prepared in econ or growth. They're very well prepared in sort of obscure things. And I do believe education is extremely important. I'm not just talking about school teachers, but I'm making a cartoon version of Forgotten Man. I think I told you that. It's almost done.
Good.
I work with President Bush, the one of the flood, right? And we're having a national debate contest for high schoolers to debate economic topics, varsity debaters. I think that's key, that they get at least exposed to these ideas. And the other factor, more grim, is that the market will expose our country to the reality, which is our credit rating is too high, our interest rate is too low. And once interest rates go up, as they did in our adulthood, you know, in the 70s or 80s, people will realize they could do with a fix and be more attentive to alternate ideas like Coolidge's, won't they?
Okay, so because I want to show you respect, and I know you work with President Bush, but I am done with the progressives in the Republican Party, and in some ways President Bush was a progressive. And how do we untangle ourselves from, you know, let's go. Gingrich, I think we'd both agree, is a big-time Republican progressive. How do we untangle ourselves from this and get a? Do you see a pure Coolidge out there?
Oh, I do. No. I just want to say I work at an institute. I don't work for a politician. So it's like working at a think tank connected with a library full of documents because I'm a historian, right? And I've seen nothing but a great spirit from President Bush. He's very happy to hear the opposite of what he thinks. So he's fun to be around. Yes, I do think there are figures. There are many of the governors who are like that. I thought a little bit of Paul Ryan writing this, and I kind of would have liked personally to see him be #1 and not #2 as a candidate. You see a little bit of in Mitch Daniels. This budgeteer, that's who Coolidge was. There are plenty of them in the United States. There are a lot of candidates at Ernst & Young, aren't there? But we have taught ourselves they can't be political winners. I believe they can, that Americans respect that. Americans have an incredible sense of industry. When you ask a lot of them, they ask a lot of themselves.
I will tell you that I think the country, I don't know if you sense this yet, but I think the country is changing yet again.
Yes.
To where we're waking up and we're seeing new solutions that, I mean, the whole point of this segment is there is no new solution. It's just an old common sense solution. Amity, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Glenn.
You bet. The name of the book is Coolidge, and it's available everywhere. Amity is really, truly one of the best history writers out there. Grab the book. You won't regret it. Back in a minute. I have to tell you, I saw some videotape that I couldn't believe, and I had to share it with you tonight. I can think of, you know, Maxine Waters being crazy, or you know, even the Van Jones stuff was really pretty crazy. I've seen some bad people say bad things in and out of government, but I have never seen the government go so wrong. Your tax dollars are going towards something that just last year the USDA flatly denied. There were these allegations that came up that participants of a cultural sensitivity training program were chanting things. Now, here's what happened. Cultural sensitivity training is, you know, if you've ever worked for a giant corporation, you've had these, and the lawyers come in, and then there's somebody else, and they're like, okay, here's what we want everybody to know. Women are just as good as men, and men are just as good as women. And you're like, oh, geez, for the love of, can somebody just kill me now? And they're always a room full of attorneys. That's who does it. Well, now this is the federal government, and the USDA came out and denied, just before the first of the year, that people were being forced to chant things like pilgrims were illegal aliens. I want to quote. They said, participants did not chant during these workshops. Really? That's an official from the USDA. Well, unfortunately for them, there's video. Watch.
I want you to say America was founded by outsiders. Say that. Who are today's insiders. We get very nervous about today's outsiders. I want you to say the pilgrims were illegal aliens. Say the pilgrims never gave their passport to the Indians.
This is some amazing tape, and there's more of it. Tomorrow, the Deep Throat that leaked this story out will be with us. He is a guy who's a little afraid to speak out, and so we will have to disguise his voice and disguise his looks, but he will be with us tomorrow. He tells them exactly what to say, and then they say it. I mean, to me, it sounds an awful lot like chanting. Maybe a little less animated. At bare minimum, it's brainwashing. More importantly, what kind of twisted training is this? They are training government workers to be racists. It took $200,000 of your money to pay for this. Here's what I would like to ask you to do. I find this some of the most incredible stuff I've ever seen. We'll show more to you tomorrow, and we have it up on theblaze.com right now. But I would like to encourage you to call your congressman. Congress needs to pull the funding from the USDA until they not only fire this guy, but fire the guys who hired him, and then explain how all of this happened. How did this guy get hired? How did it go through? How come you covered it up in the first place? Only Congress can stop the funding. And it's really when their money is choked off, that's when they start to care. Please call your congressman. Find the story up at theblaze.com now. It's progressive indoctrination in the cover of darkness. We'll show you more of that and what your tax dollars are funding on tomorrow's program. Bring the truth to light. Let me change gears, kind of. We know the media has a problem with the truth, but it's a pretty big problem. The Associated Press ran a hit piece. Senator Paul wants to round up immigrants. This is a story, he says, we'll just put them in camps. The article reads, quote, Paul says people want a party that's less aggressive on foreign policy and drug laws. Paul says he sees voters wanting, quote, somebody who wants to round people up and put them in camps and send them back to Mexico. That's one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. Mainly because it's not true. Did they make that up? No, the Associated Press actually got that from a transcript of Fox News Sunday online. Now, an honest reporter would say, gee, that sounds kind of ridiculous. Really? Perhaps we should watch the video. But this quote fits exactly what the media believes the Tea Party is all about and Rand Paul is all about. And so they don't double check, because if I said to you that, one of these goofballs, if I said, what's his name from Ohio that just retired with the big ears, who said he saw space aliens, you'd say, that's ridiculous. And I'd say, no, that's Dennis Kucinich. And they'd be like, oh, I don't need to check on that. Well, with Dennis Kucinich, you would, even if you did check on it, you'd find out that's absolutely true. But when you check this out, it says the exact opposite. Here's the actual quote. I go around people and I find they don't want somebody who wants to round people up, putting them in camps and sending them back to Mexico. So what happened? Well, the AP killed the story, but I think it's already too late because it was digested into the system. The story could still be found this afternoon, at least on some news outlets like usnews.com, the miamiherald.com, salon.com, yahoo.com, several others. We did it this afternoon before we went on the air. The story is still out there. The fact that they issued a correction doesn't matter because the damage is already done and the story continues to run. The Associated Press running what appears to be from an honest mistake from Fox News. Because that's where it originally came from. Fox News made that mistake. But that was in a rush transcript. Means they're just typing as it goes along, and sometimes you make mistakes. But with so many progressives on the left and the right, was it a mistake? In this case, I believe it was. Wherever the lie originated from, whether it was a mistake or a lie, the fact remains that you can't trust the media. You can't believe anyone and anything that they report on, including me. That's why I've never asked for your trust. I ask you, do your own homework. Protesters, one last story here. Protesters are now lining up in front of the LAPD in support of Christopher Dorner. Did you see this weekend? This is the dirtbag who went on a killing rampage, murdering 4, including 2 LAPD police officers. They claim they don't support Dorner's death methods. I love that. But they object to his police brutality. This is like protesting the Department of Transportation in support of Adolf Hitler, I guess. I'm against Hitler's death chambers, but he was totally right about, that Autobahn. That road was sweet. The truth is, they support this guy 100%. Here's what the group Anonymous posted just before the demonstration. Watch.
As many of you know, there has been a peaceful demonstration planned for Saturday, February 16th. outside of LAPD headquarters at 100 West 1st Street in Los Angeles. We encourage you to come show your support for the people who have been victims of police brutality. The events that transpired Tuesday reflect the growing dangers our government poses to us. We are Christopher Dorner. We are the resistance.
We are Christopher Dorner. Well, I'm not. It's despicable. It is either Marxist, progressive, communist, or anarchist. I don't know, but I don't like any of those ists. And no one seems to mind. In fact, a CNN panel seemed to totally sympathize with the plight of this deranged killer.
This has been an important public conversation that we've had about police brutality, about police corruption, about state violence. I mean, there were even talks about making him the first domestic drone target. I mean, this is serious business here. I don't think it's been a waste of time at all. And as far as Dorner himself goes, he's been like a real-life superhero to many people. Now, don't get me wrong. What he did was awful. Killing innocent people is bad. But when you read his manifesto, when you read the message that he left, he wasn't entirely crazy. He had a plan and a mission here, and many people aren't rooting for him to kill innocent people. They're rooting for somebody who was wronged to get a kind of revenge against the system. It's almost like watching Django Unchained in real life. It's kind of exciting.
Unbelievable. Would anybody have, would that message have swept the country if somebody said that about Timothy McVeigh? The answer is yes, and it should have. The collective minds of Americans have been poisoned with progressivism, and they have been caught now in their lies. But it doesn't seem to matter. We have a serious uphill battle ahead of us, but we do have the antidote. We just have to stay awake a long enough period of time to be able to carry it through. The antidote is truth. Stick to the truth. Trust no one but the things that you have researched yourself. Don't quote someone that you haven't looked up yourself. Know it to be true, and then stand up and use it in the battle for freedom. For anyone who doesn't yet know about the American Dream Labs or doesn't see the vision quite yet, let me start with the basic idea of what lies ahead. We are living in a world now that has endless possibilities. Due to the rapid advance and exponential growth of the digital world, we are entering the point of singularity, which is best been explained in the past by science fiction writers, exposing both the good and the bad effects of a singularity. But we're here now, and they have written time and time again. We've seen it in 1984 all the way to the Terminator. The future is very bright or very dark, depending on how this new technology will be used. We will experience the kind of changes to our world and to our lives that man experienced between 1850 and 1940 or 1950. People didn't have cars in 1920. By 1940, everybody did. People didn't have electricity 10 years before that. It changed everything. But it happened really over a 90 or 100-year period. What's about to come our way will all change the world just that much, but change it in a 10 to 20-year period. Our job at American Dream Labs is to find, apply, and explain the best of emerging technology. This task is requiring the best in science as well as the best storytellers in the world, because I'm not the scientist, but I need to find these things and then tell the story. The American Dream Labs is really basically my Bell Labs or Disney Imagineers, my WED enterprises. And let me tell you something, I spent some time this weekend and it is exciting. Over the last 4 days, I have met with my dreamers in a very plain, unmarked 7,000 square foot warehouse in a suburb of Salt Lake City, Utah. We put one of our dream labs there because of something we're doing this summer. I'll tell you about it here in a second. But this weekend, I spent about 3 hours with some scientists who are on the verge of answering the question whether or not we can really have green energy in a timely fashion and enough energy to power our world. I will tell you that I now believe the answer is a clear, powerful, and resounding yes. The things that I saw this weekend, I couldn't believe. I didn't think they were possible when they explained this to me just a few months ago. And they said, Glenn, we're really, and I said, yeah, right. You can't imagine some of the things that I saw this weekend. And in time, I believe you will feel the same sense of history that I did if, after we complete all of our testing, it remains true. The world we know it is on the precipice of profound change, and it is good. We have decided to keep much of this work under wraps, at least until we lock a few pieces into place and continue our experiments that are currently ongoing, that are very promising. But also, we are not going to present anything to you until we know we don't become Tucker. If you don't know what that is, look up the car reference. Meanwhile, this weekend, the other project that I was working on is The Man in the Moon. This is an experiment in storytelling where we have assembled a team of artists, digital dreamers, sound engineers, writers, live performers, architects, musicians that are all on the same page. We worked from Thursday last week until almost midnight on Saturday on the beginnings of our live July 4th event. It actually happens on the 6th of July, but it is a 3-day event and tickets will go on sale tomorrow. I will tell you that it will be unlike anything we have ever done before. Our sloppy initial tests, we were testing out fabric and projectors and everything else. But at one point, they sent me down just to do this test, and we did some initial tests. It will, what you'll see here in a minute will barely resemble the actual show, but they were so fantastic in person that those who were in the room actually gasped at the possibilities. I'll show you just a little bit. At one point, you'll see the moon, and I'll hold up a stick, and I want you to see the little man on that stick. I'll tell you about it here in a second, but first, look at what we did this weekend.
Tell me what it takes to shine just like you. Show me that the sun will be coming soon. Hey now, Luna. Hey now, Luna. Hey now, Luna. Hey now.
So that stick I held up will be the size of me on stage compared to the actual moon when we finish. This summer you'll be able to be part of something that I believe many will never forget. Your children will never forget. It will uplift, inspire, and officially help us chart a new course of quality and out-of-the-box live events that others in entertainment I think will follow in the years to come. The tickets go on sale tomorrow for Man in the Moon. Join us this summer.
Tell me what it takes to shine just like you.
I have to tell you, anybody who pines for the old days, yeah, not me. Not me. Looking at this car and the brakes, and it's like, this would suck beyond belief. The speedometer says it goes up to 80. I don't think I want to be caught in this at 80 miles an hour. Anyway, on tomorrow's program, the whistleblower from the USDA. What was really going on in that room? For the first time, speaking out. And Wednesday, sheriffs from all across the country willing to stand up for the Second Amendment rights of their citizens. If you have a sheriff, what should you be doing to help him? And what should you be looking for in a sheriff? Until then, we'll see you tomorrow on the radio from Dallas. Good night, America.